What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to offer my spoiler-free review of The Fall of the House of Usher, coming to Netflix on October 12th. Netflix has given me a very specific list of topics that are 100% off limits. But what I can tell you is that this has the potential to be one of the big horror sensations leading up to Halloween this year, although I still have very high hopes for the movie Suitable Flesh. In any event, The Fall of the House of Usher is Mike Flanagan's latest horror extravaganza, which is always a special occasion for Netflix. Not all of his shows are created equal, but they are always worth a look. And just speaking from my own experiences watching his movies and his shows, Mike Flanagan is one of the few filmmakers alive today that can give me those little miniature heart attacks without using a single jump scare. And of course, he uses jump scares as well, but I'm always much more impressed when a filmmaker can use subtle techniques to provide those really evil chills that just creep right up your back and neck. And this show has a few of those moments early on. And as a fan of the horror genre, I am grateful. But this latest production reunites Flanagan with a lot of familiar faces from his previous productions for what is a true love song to the stories and poems of the divine Edgar Allan Poe. And let me emphasize, these tales are very loosely adapted. You don't need to reread all of Poe's best stories to get prepared, but if you want to, have at it. They're fucking great. He's one of my all-time favorite writers. But here is the official synopsis provided by Netflix for public consumption. In this wicked series based on the works of Edgar Allan Poe, ruthless siblings Roderick and Madeline Usher have built Fortunato Pharmaceuticals into an empire of wealth, privilege, and power. But past secrets come to light when the heirs to the Usher dynasty start dying at the hands of a mysterious woman from their youth. And I must admit, I was hooked from the first moment I saw the first teaser featuring the lovely Carla Gugino. I've been obsessed with Carla Gugino for decades at this point, and I love the fact that she loves the horror genre and working with Mike Flanagan so much. I mean, they've got many successful collaborations together at this point. But I must also acknowledge I found the final product of this show to be a bit of a roller coaster ride in terms of quality. There were many scenes that left me absolutely thunderstruck or just completely, totally creeped out in the best possible way. And then there are other scenes where I was like, are y'all deliberately trying to make this like the worst show I've ever seen? Like, so, let's just say the show is very uneven. When the show is good, it is really good, bordering on great. But when the show is bad, both the writing and the acting, they come across as almost like a really bad parody of a really bad soap opera. But it lends, in a weird way, it kind of lends the show this trashy flavor, which I really enjoyed. Like, I was never not on the hook. I ripped through all 8 episodes really quickly, but there's no getting around the fact that this show feels like one of those trashy bestsellers from the 1980s that you find at a beach house, like covered in sand and suntan lotion. It's not going for the same vibe as the literature upon which it is based. But even though I have my fair share of criticisms about the execution of the idea, I was blown away by the structure created by Flanagan and his team, where they're able to experiment with so much incredible material. And I can't specify which characters and which episodes deal with which famous tales, but I can say that a lot of bits and pieces from some of my favorites are all kind of stirred into the brew. Obviously, we have The Fall of the House of Usher, which was first published back in 1839, but we also have The Mask of the Red Death, The Cask of Amontillado, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, The Black Cat, The Telltale Heart, The Pit and the Pendulum. And as far as poems go, we have one of my personal favorites, Annabel Lee, and of course, The Raven. And I can't think of anything less commercial in 2023 than lovingly paying homage to great poetry from almost 200 years ago. So the writers and the cast, they get an A+ for effort for at least making the attempt to include so much poetry. But I should also add that I'm an easy mark for Edgar Allan Poe. I grew up reading his stories, and as a student at the University of Virginia, I don't think a week went by during my 4 years there where I didn't stop by Edgar Allan Poe's room on the range to see the little exhibit that's been erected in his honor. Never mind the fact that he swiftly got expelled for excessive gambling debts and failure to pay his tuition. They're proud of him now that he's been safely in the ground for about 175 years. And I should also pause for a second just to acknowledge that Mike Flanagan is but the latest in a long line of filmmakers who have tackled Edgar Allan Poe. Most famously, Roger Corman produced a handful of adaptations starring Vincent Price back in the early 60s. And to be honest, I kind of like the posters for those movies much more than the actual movies themselves. But we must give credit where credit is due. Roger Corman went back to that well over and over again, probably just because the stories were in the public domain and they were easy to get. But even I've experimented with the works of Edgar Allan Poe with my collaboration with Victor Rodriguez and Tony Stella with the audio version of The Cask of Amontillado, which I will link in the description below. But for diehard fans who are looking for rigorous and faithful adaptations of Edgar Allan Poe, this is probably not the show for you. I think you'll be delighted by all the little nuggets and morsels from his stories, but only really with like one story does it feel like the writing staff for the show actually read the story in question And oftentimes I noticed that they were chickening out of the more grim and ruthless endings that Edgar Allan Poe cooked up 200 years ago. But there is a lot to praise about this show, so let's start with the broad strokes. No matter what my opinion might be on which movies and which shows are Mike Flanagan's best, I think it is cool as fucking shit that Mike Flanagan has devoted his entire career at this point to creating scary stories on both the big and small screen. And even more impressive is how he's basically built this little empire with a family of writers and directors and actors who share his passion, who assemble every few years, either to adapt a literary horror classic like they did with Shirley Jackson, or build them from scratch. And more often than not, I think they stick the landing. As far as my favorites go, I think Midnight Mass remains Mike Flanagan's most personal and most memorable achievement, and I don't know if that's ever likely to change. However, The Haunting of Hill House legitimately scared the shit out of me on multiple occasions when I first watched it. I watched it in the dark, a little bit high, and I was totally freaked out. And I don't think The Fall of the House of Usher is quite on the level of either of those shows, although its ambition is tremendous. They're really going for it with this one, which often makes the show feel a little bit over the top in a good way, but it's also wildly uneven in quality. That said, I still love the ride from start to finish, even as I got a case of creative whiplash for going back and forth between so many clumsy, ineffective scenes and so many scenes where I was like, holy shit, this is just wildly entertaining. And so I was completely, totally hooked from the first episode onward, even though I found some of the performances to be absolutely horrible. I mean, some of the line readings, you're like, oh my God, are y'all deliberately trying to make this bad? It is pure, righteous trash, but I was all in. Because every once in a while, there'll be a scene of some really effective horror where I was like, oh my God, it's really effective at times. And then there's some other scenes where I think there are going to be a lot of people who make a little sport out of laughing at how unintentionally funny they are. And it's tough to know who deserves credit for the best episodes and the worst, or the best scenes and the worst, because Mike Flanagan, he only directed half the episodes, while Michael Fimagnari, if I'm saying his name correctly, directed the other half, but they're also working with a decent-sized writing staff, so it feels much less personal than some of Mike Flanagan's previous productions. But in that this show is juggling so many different characters and so many separate plot lines, it was probably inevitable that the final product would feel like a mixed bag and inconsistent, but let's be clear, there are so many fantastic scenes scattered throughout. I think there are going to be a large number of people who completely ignore the show's flaws and just go all in on its best qualities, because it is a very watchable show. Even when it's terrible, I'll still sitting on my couch bring it. I'm enjoying the ride. And I wish I could call attention to which specific scenes and which specific episodes really blew my mind. But I'll say this, if you're patient and stick with it, from episode 1 to episode 8, there will be scenes and or episodes where you'll feel rewarded for your patience, especially toward the end of episode 6 and toward the end of episode 8. I was like, God damn, they are really sticking the landing. And then, of course, those scenes will be followed by scenes where oh my God, this is one of the worst shows I've ever seen. And that kind of, I guess that seesaw, or that back and forth, or water sloshing back and forth in the bathtub, I felt that way right up until the closing credits of episode 8, where I was constantly oscillating between loving the show and hating the show, but overall very much enjoying the ride. But let's give some credit where credit is due and call attention to the lovely Carla Gugino, who has that perfect, deep, sexy, sultry voice that is ideal for the horror genre. I mean, she's just leaning into this, and she's getting to play a lot of different variations on her role, which allows her to kind of show off her range. But you can tell she's having a blast, just sometimes hamming it up and sometimes just being disturbing as hell, but she is fucking fantastic in this. But as far as the actual House of Usher is concerned, we have different actors playing the young and old versions of Roderick and Madeline Usher. And I think both sets are pretty goddamn good. So with the young version of the Ushers, we have Willa Fitzgerald and Zach Gilford, both of which are absolutely incredible. I loved Willa in the show Reacher, but she's fucking incredible in this show. And as far as the older Ushers are concerned, we have Mary McDonnell and Bruce Greenwood. And Bruce Greenwood is absolutely holding nothing back in this. And he's been giving us great performances for decades. I mean, go back and watch the Adam Agoyan films, Exotica and The Sweet Hereafter. Oh my God, this is one of the best actors of his generation. But he really seems to understand how to create a vibe, a tone, a mood of old school horror stories where you're sitting around a campfire or sitting there sipping on some brandy or some whiskey and just telling really scary stories. And his delivery style and his tone of voice allows the more subtle horror ingredients to kind of really sneak up on you if you're paying close attention. They're little details or a little trail of breadcrumbs that begin at the beginning of the show and that will pay dividends up until the very end. And it's just incredible that Bruce Greenwood is able to sustain that tension and that style. And I should also mention that he's sharing these scenes with Carl Lumley. My favorite part of the show by far is just the scenes of these two guys talking in a room. But perhaps the most entertaining performance, perhaps the most unhinged performance, perhaps the most unpredictable performance is that delivered by Tania Miller, where she just fucking goes for it, where you're just like, oh my God, like everybody else is just showing up to work, where you were trying to create like one of the all-time great, just deranged TV performances, and she was just absolutely incredible. And the fact that this is a non-spoiler review is just absolutely murdering me because I can't give any specificity as to why she's so good, but just hold onto your seat and wait until she unleashes the beast because she's going to give you quite an experience. And in that, this is a Mike Flanagan production. As always, we have the great Kate Siegel, his wife, in a prominent role, and I've really enjoyed what she's brought to the table over the years, in particular in Midnight Mass. I thought she was incredible in that. Here, her performance, like the show, is kind of all over the place. And there are times where I was like, are y'all trying to just like recreate like a dumbed down version of Succession? Or what are you doing here? And all I'll say is, be patient, and if you like her as an actress, your patience will be rewarded with where they finally take her character by the bitter end. And another performance that was absolutely incredible was that by Samantha Sloyan, and maybe it's not as bone-chilling and eerie and disturbing as her performance from Midnight Mass, where I was like, God damn, you're tapping into something really disturbing. I mean, she's a remarkable actress. But she's incredible in this as well. Once again, I got to be very vague. I'll just say that toward the end of the season, she delivers one of the most epic, colossal, just shitstorm freak-out meltdowns that I've ever seen, where I was just howling with glee just watching it unfold. But she's an absolutely remarkable actress, and it seems like Mike Flanagan's one of the only storytellers out there that realizes just how good she can be when given the right material. But as I mentioned before, the cast is not universally good. Henry Thomas has either lost his touch or he never had a touch to begin with, and this is a guy where I've been watching him in movies my entire life. I saw E.T. in the theater when I was fucking 6 back in 1982. I've been watching him for a long time. But goddamn, I don't know what direction he received. I was like, dude, like you're acting like this is the first time you've been in a show or a movie ever, in spite of having like 40 years of experience behind you. And I hate to say this, but Mark Hamill is not much better, where he is just delivering the ultimate hammy performance. He's just chewing on the scenery, but in a weird way, his terrible performance kind of reinforces just the overall kind of fun, trashy quality of the show. And I'll also give credit where credit is due. If you stick with him, there will come a point where like, oh, gotcha, I see what you've been building up toward. And I would say Mark Hamill redeems himself by the end in terms of all the trashy crap that came beforehand and where his character ends up. But on first glance, after the first couple episodes, you're going to think that somehow Mark Hamill is dropping the ball. But be patient, stick with him. I promise the end result is worth it. But in addition to some of these clumsy line readings and kind of bordering on amateur performances at times that hurt the overall impact of the show, the writers of the show also have a nauseating tendency from time to time to get up on their high horse and sermonize. But because this show is about the pharmaceutical industry and a very corrupt, powerful tycoon who's got the blood of millions on his hands from the products that he has put out into the world, every once in a while this show decides to spell out the obvious by having these lectures about like the evils of the pharmaceutical industry. And I'm like, you know what? You've already made it abundantly clear from all the horrors you've exposed us to. You don't need to stop the show basically in its tracks and have an actor stand up and give us a lecture that sounds like it's being given to like 8-year-old children. It's like anyone with half a brain can get what you're going for just from the story itself. And don't get me wrong, they're preaching to the choir. I have absolutely no love for the people out there who make billions of dollars basically exploiting people's weaknesses by selling painkillers to them, ruining their lives. I'm already batting for the same team, but that doesn't mean I excuse kind of clumsy, obvious storytelling. It's almost like the writers at a certain point chickened out and realized, ooh, like we haven't spelled out our message clearly enough, and we're worried people might not understand or they might not get it. So we have to have these scenes where we like give a lecture to the audience. Like, no, you told a good story. The lesson is clear. And to be perfectly honest, I felt like they took some of these scenes to such an extreme that they dispelled like the style and the atmosphere of horror that's been so carefully cultivated across all 8 episodes. They come very close to ruining their own show. And that's a problem that a lot of modern storytellers have, where they're so caught up in their message, they forget to deliver it in an effective way. Like, I don't care if your message is James Hancock's YouTube channel is great and everybody should watch it. Like, yes, I like that message, but you have to deliver that message in an effective way. Like, I guess the merits of the message are no excuse for clumsy, obvious storytelling. So shame on you, Flanagan, for dropping the ball in the latter part of the season. That said, so much of the show works so goddamn well, I will forgive a lot of shortcomings and a lot of flaws. And I'll say this, in terms of horrific effects or creepy effects, the show more or less sticks to the landing, even if it continues to offer us one bad scene for every great scene right up until the closing credits. So in closing, I'll just say, if you're on the fence about whether or not to watch it, I would just say watch the full-length trailer. Does a really good job of capturing the overall flavor of the show. If you like that trailer, let her rip, dive in with both feet. You're going to have a fucking blast. And best of all, I think this show has a very good chance of helping an entirely new generation of potential fans discover the work of Edgar Allan Poe. And it's incredible how his stories and poems were written nearly 200 years ago, and they hold up. Like, they remain like beautifully written and incredibly effective and creepy as hell. Like, read The Telltale Heart. It'll creep you out. Read The Black Cat. You'll be astonished at the fucking savagery of that story and just how dark. I mean, the ending is horrific. Or Cask of Amontillado. Creepy as hell. These stories are incredible. Or if you just want to read hauntingly beautiful poetry, Annabelle Lee will absolutely break your heart. So in the interest of that, I just want to read a quick intro to the short story, The Fall of the House of Usher. It was a dark and soundless day near the end of the year, and clouds were hanging low in the heavens. All day I had been riding on horseback through country with little life or beauty, and in the early evening I came within view of the House of Usher. I do not know how it was, but with my first sight of the building, a sense of heavy sadness filled my spirit. I looked at the scene before me, at the house itself, at the ground around it, at the cold stone walls of the building, at its empty eye-like windows, and at a few dead trees. I looked at the scene, I say, with a complete sadness of soul, which was no healthy earthly feeling. There was a coldness, a sickening of the heart, in which I could discover nothing to lighten the weight I felt. What was it, I asked myself? What was it that was so fearful, so frightening in my view of the House of Usher? This was a question to which I could find no answer. In my opinion, that is just stunningly beautiful stuff, and it's so eerie and so creepy and so effortlessly enjoyable and readable all these years later. And that's not always the case with writers from the 1800s, where sometimes their style is so florid and so ornate and so complex, where it almost comes across like hieroglyphics to a modern reader, people who are used to reading just like trashy bestsellers. But I think Edgar Allan Poe, like, people will still be reading his stuff 200 more years from now. So I strongly recommend everybody pick up a copy of this bad boy, which is basically the complete tales and poems of Edgar Allan Poe. And I will not pretend that I've read everything in here, but I've read quite a few. And even if you've read some of his best stories multiple times, they're always worth revisiting. And every once in a while, you'll discover an obscure classic like Ligeia, because I saw the Roger Corman movie, The Tomb of Ligeia, and I was like, all right, well, I need to familiarize myself with the source material. And so there's a reason why all these years later, filmmakers are still interested in his work, inspired by his work, trying to adapt his work, because he's one of the best goddamn writers ever to do it in any genre and any era. So thank you to everybody involved with this show for giving us a reason to talk about and be excited about Edgar Allan Poe again. And if you really love the show more so than I did, I apologize for all the criticisms I had, but we must be honest, even with our filmmaking heroes. And Mike Flanagan, like I said at the beginning, I'm in awe over the fact that he's been able to basically devote an entire career just to making horror shows and horror movies, and more often than not, sticking the landing. Like, even on his kind of lesser efforts, like Dr. Sleep. I really enjoyed Dr. Sleep. I mean, I didn't enjoy all of Dr. Sleep, but Rebecca Ferguson was absolutely incredible in that. And so I look forward to each and every single Mike Flanagan production, whether it's for the big or small screen. And so I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on this show today. That's all I've got to say today. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. And I really look forward to seeing how people will react to this show in October when it comes out in a few short weeks, because October is my favorite month of the year. I love reading horror stories and seeing horror movies and just getting excited, all like in the lead up and the build up to Halloween. And what's really fun about this month, or the upcoming month, seeing just how many people do the same thing that I do, where they just want to think about horror all day if possible, just to be in the proper frame of mind when Halloween finally rolls around, which is the one night a year where everybody just lets their inhibitions kind of slide away and they're ready to get fucking weird. And it's always a delightfully unpredictable, sinful, memorable evening, and hopefully this year will not disappoint on that front, at least from a cinematic and television standpoint. I hope we'll have a couple good options to discuss over the next couple weeks, but I'm officially rambling at this point. Hit that notification bell, all that good stuff, and hunt me down on Twitter at Colbrax. But thank you so much for watching. Hope everybody has a great week, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.